Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be taking a look at a bunch of Eeveelutions from semi-modern sets. So basically we're going to be taking a look at Black and White, X and Y, and Sun and Moon undervalued Eeveelutions. With prismatic evolution so hot right now and price is just completely in the stratosphere, as well as Evolving Skies pretty much inaccessible, especially when it comes to the VMAX cards. I wanted to take a look at some of these easier to grab but still equally stunning cards for people to collect. So without further ado, let's get into it. To start off, we're going to be going through a couple of Eevee cards. So the first one I wanted to mention was this tag team card, the special mechanic from the Sun and Moon era. Of course, X and Y had megas, and that was sort of the start of like gimmicks when it came to Pokemon. So megas were the gimmick of X and Y, and then Sun and Moon introduced Z moves. Obviously, that was kind of hard to capture in a card, so they introduced tag teams instead in the TCG. And Sword and Shield, we had Gigantamaxing and Dynamaxing captured by VMAX card. So, of course, as a unique mechanic to Sun and Moon, this is a sort of generational specific card. We haven't seen any tag team cards since, and a lot of the tag team cards are generally exceptionally expensive. But the promo cards, select promo cards, are still fairly accessible and fairly undervalued. I mean, when it comes to this card, it reminds me a lot of the Drowsy card and even a little bit of the Magikarp card. Two cards that have experienced insane growth recently. But if you take a look at this Eevee and Snorlax, it's going for $58.77. Despite some great growth over the past year, 166%, it's still quite undervalued in my opinion for what it is at $58. Taking a look at recent sales, there have been a few that are under market value. Right over here, these two, and then if we take a look back here, we have a few more. So the card is a little bit it is dancing a little bit between plateauing and sort of dropping. Some of the sales are kind of keeping it still buoyant right here, which is why we're seeing a bit of a flattening over here. But overall, two very popular Pokemon, two Gen 1 Pokemon, and again, sort of embodying that goofy art style that so many people love. Next up, we have another tag team card in the same duo. The reason I wanted to bring this up is because, as we all know, in Sword and Shield, rainbows were officially discontinued. Not to say that they won't be revisited again in future generations, but as it is, Scarlet and Violet has not had proper rainbow cards. You know, stellar cards don't really count because the borders are the only thing that are rainbow-esque. These are proper rainbow cards, and we have no indication if they'll even be revisited. And so this card at $129, a stunning duo and so adorable. Two very, relaxed Pokemon right here, embodying my state, very chill. And honestly, a lot of rainbow cards are just super undervalued in my opinion. They're really great collection pieces, especially when you fill your pages with them. They look really nice together. And for the final Eevee, and this is another goofy artwork and alternate art again. I mean, technically alternate arts were introduced during Sword and Shield, which is the generation that followed Sun and Moon. But right here we have again another goofy artwork, this yawning sort of sleepy Eevee. I think there was a specific name for it. I kind of forget now, it escapes my mind. But if we take a look at near mint sales right here and take a look at the graph, we see that it's grown quite substantially over the past year, 139% growth, still $41. I mean, compared to the Eevee in terms of the fruit basket Eevee that'll be coming out, and even the other Eevee alt art from Prismatic Evolutions. I mean, Evolving Skies completely ignored Eevee. I'd say this is a pretty solid one for $41, especially if you're into that sort of niche of getting those different abstract or unique artworks. Next, and I don't think there's any denying that this is one of the most gorgeous dark cards out there, Darkrai and Umbreon. This card has experienced some enormous growth recently. If you take a look at near mint, it'll show you just how tremendous this growth has been. Over the past year, 295% growth. Personally picked this card up actually when it was going for around the $35 range USD, and it is just so brilliant. But at the end of the day, I think this is still better than a lot of the prismatic altars. I mean, personally, I love the tag team between Darkrai and Umbreon, two of the best dark type Pokemon in my opinion. And there is just a certain charm to this that a lot of other cards don't really capture. You know, Darkrai and Umbreon seem to stand out, even in the black background of the cityscape. And there's also a Pikachu, if y'all didn't notice, right over here on the bulletin board, sort of winking at us. A little cute addition to the card that not too many people actually notice. And I mean, you can't get more iconic than this. Next up, we have the Jolteon from Generations. Also own this card, and I think that I'll run through these cards a little bit quickly. But there are a few Generations sort of regular EXs, and there's something very, very crisp about these artworks. I mean, the outline, the black outline, it's so sharp, and it makes the design that kind of, I mean, EXs were so much better in X and Y than they are in Scarlet and Violet. That's just a personal opinion. Without the distracting sort of glitter pattern on top, and particularly with a lot of the design sort of coming out from the edges of the artwork, the Jolteon, for instance, at $13, and this Vaporeon, they just look so stunning and really reasonably priced as well. Personally, over getting a Pokeball artwork, I would rather get one of these EXs from Generation. And then we also have the Leafeon right here. I mean, $14.54. These cards have been growing as well, but if we take a look at the past year, we'll see that it's not actually as dramatic as it seemed. You know, it was actually going for around $12 to $13. And then it kind of dropped down to $9.50, and now it's kind of jumped back up to $15. But if we're looking from here, you know, it's pretty much like a $2 growth, so not too substantial. It's still very accessible. Again, so crisp and clean. Next up, we have the Glaceon Full Art from Fates Collide, $18.80. This is a really nice full art. Honestly, X and Y full arts are just so crazy good. Black and white sort of was the intro to full art cards, so they didn't really hit the mark as well. I mean, the Tornadus and Thunderous cards, they were alright. I didn't really love them that much. The full arts that first began with Zekrom and Rushram, those are pretty solid because, you know, their historical positioning. But X and Y is really where I think full arts hit their peak. In Sun and Moon, they kind of fell off, and then Sword and Shield just like not even close to as good. So really, I think the peak was X and Y for full arts, and really this Glaceon does embody that, as do some of the full arts that I'll be showing later on. Next up, we have Generations. This is a 20th anniversary set, of course. And so there were a lot of beautiful cards. Basically, Radiant Collection was a subset within Generations where you could pull certain cards such as the Radiant Charizard, the Radiant Sylveon, Radiant Flareon, and this is just such a cute artwork. The baby eyes that are being made by Flareon, Jolteon, and Vaporeon, the OG Eeveelution trio. It's just such a clean artwork, and I really like the way the texture works on these cards. A little bit different than the usual sort of aesthetic you expect. It definitely holds true to the Legendary Treasure sort of Radiant subset, so that's kind of carried on in this X and Y set, and we don't really see this style of artwork as much later on. Next, we have Espeon Full Art. Now, this is the last full art from the X and Y. But again, you see what I'm saying about the background and the textures are really clean on this card. And of course, the sort of meld between the pink and purple almost creates this plasma effect, a very sort of mystical artwork. And of course, that's very fitting for a psychic type Pokemon such as Espeon. If we take a look at price here, we also have to filter, which I find really annoying. I wish it just stayed on near mint, but for a lot of the older cards, it just starts to go to LP and below. But yeah, so we see that over the past year, it's had a 70% growth, pretty solid overall. $33, still a pretty nice art, not too bad value. Next up we have, and I think this is still vastly undervalued, and I personally need to pick this card up. It's the Espeon and Deoxys GX Sun and Moon promo alternate art. You know, one of those I was mentioning how they're like quite undervalued. Alongside the Umbreon, you know, this card was made available, and as you can see, substantial growth again. 161%, but I really don't think this is its peak personally. I mean, this is an iconic legendary from Gen 3, and of course Espeon's sort of like watching it emerge from the crater. Deoxys is sort of this mysterious Pokemon from outer space. In some episodes they showed it kind of crash land, and so I suppose it's emerging from its sort of shell or meteorite which it was buried in, or it was sort of transformed as. So Espeon's just kind of like look at it like, what on earth are you doing? But stunning artwork overall. Next up, we're finally on the last evolution of the video. This is going to be Sylveon, and this is one of many Hidden Fates shinies. Personally, I did not include the Glaceon or the Leafeon shinies because those are barely shinies. I mean, look at it and tell me that that's even a shiny. I mean, it almost reminds me of the Garchomp, which is barely a shiny itself. I don't know why they did that for some Pokemon, but they could have done something like this with Sylveon, you know, going from pink to blue for the outer sort of coloring. Really, really nice choice, I think, really, for a shiny Pokemon. $88, still nowhere close to the Umbreon, which is going for insanely high values and has barely a shiny as well. I mean, I do like it personally because they do change the yellow to blue, and it's a subtle but nice shiny. This one's a very out there, very in-your-face shiny, and I think this one will definitely resonate with more people, particularly if you're Eeveelution fan. Next up, another tag team, and this one is just the regular GX that you can pull from Unbroken Bonds. There's also an alt-art version to this card, but that is vastly more expensive and harder to acquire versus this one, which is actually $31. If we take a look in the graph for near mint, we'll see that this card has also grown quite heavily over the past year, 134% growth. But we're actually seeing, and this is a pretty decent indicator for this card, it actually went up to $30, dropped, and then recovered its price again. So this is pretty telling of how loved this card is, or how much potential it holds in people's eyes. And two perfect fairy type Pokemon, especially fairy types, were introduced during the X and Y era, and so Sylveon was also introduced during the X and Y era. Gardevoir was the partner to the champion of the Kalos region, Diantha. It can Mega Evolve. So arguably the two most popular fairy types are together in this card. And they're also in what I would assume is like a flower field or some sort of open, serene landscape, which is clearly beautified by their presence. And finally, we have another Radiant Gallery, and I absolutely adore this card. Oh my goodness. We have Sylveon right here, and we have an Eevee biting on one of the feelers that Sylveon has, and just in line with Sylveon's sort of personality, what they convey through the fairy type, being gentler, being sweeter, sort of that maternal instinct kind of going on, just like taking care of the Eevee, playing with a very, very nice personality-driven card. And again, with the heavily played annoyance on the graph, here we go with the near mint. Over the past year, it's had 176% growth, going for $83 currently, $83, $87. If we take a look at some recent sales, we see that's going for $85, $82, $84, $95. So still on the rise. I expect no doubt that this card will probably continue its uptick, particularly in this bull market and with the hype and craze that runs around Eeveelution. There's still a decent number of Eeveelutions I can get from those two generations that are not in the sort of top 10 when it comes to in Sword and Shield and Scarlet Violet put together. If you're interested in checking out another video on Eeveelutions, I'd suggest checking out my Prismatic Evolutions or Evolving Skies videos. Both of those I talk about the new generations and how you can get some more affordable cards in those two sets. With that, I'll conclude the video. Hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll catch you all in the next one.